Now we're going to start talking about a new group of organisms, the kingdom Protista, or the Protists. We've talked about the bacteria and the archaea, which are separate domains of organisms with prokaryotic cells. You may remember that they tended to have smaller cells and did not have a nucleus or other organelles surrounded by a membrane. Now we're going to move into the Eukarya, which includes all other life on Earth. Remember that eukaryotes typically have larger cells than prokaryotes. They also have their genetic material organized into a nucleus and have other membrane-bound organelles. Some of the eukarya are very familiar to you. Plants, fungi, and animals, including us, are in this domain. But what are protists? They're actually a very diverse group. In fact, most scientists agree that there are actually 3 or maybe even 6 different kingdoms of protists. So some of them are as different from each other as we are from plants. If you look at the phylogenetic tree here, you can see that there is a kingdom of protists that is closely related to plants, a kingdom that is closely related to animals, and a kingdom that is very different from all other eukaryotes. When we talk about protists as a whole, we're really grouping them together more by what they aren't than by what they are. They are eukaryotes that aren't plants, aren't animals, and aren't fungi. There are some protists you might be familiar with. Maybe in elementary school you learned about the paramecium, which is a protist. But some other familiar organisms are also protists, including many plankton, algae, seaweeds, and diatoms. Most protists are single-celled organisms, but not all of them are. Seaweeds and kelp are actually not plants, but are multicellular protists. The giant kelp can grow up to 215 feet long. We talked about which domain protists belong to, so from that you should be able to figure out whether or not they have a nucleus. If you haven't already, open up Participation Assignment 5 and answer this question. So what do protists eat? Because they are a diverse group, they also have a diverse range of ways to get energy. Some protists are heterotrophs that consume material to get their energy. Others are autotrophs that get their energy using sunlight. Protists who are heterotrophs can get their food in 2 different ways. Some absorb nutrients directly from their surrounding, a process known as osmotrophic nutrition. Others actually engulf and eat food. This process is known as phagocytosis. In phagocytosis, the protist surrounds food with its plasma membrane and engulfs it. As the membrane closes around the food, it forms a vesicle, which is like a little membrane bubble containing the food. This vesicle is called a food vacuole, where the food will be digested with enzymes. See if you can answer this participation question. Think about why a protist might be performing phagocytosis. Most protists live in moist or wet environments, so water regulation is very important. They tend to have a higher concentration of solutes, or dissolved particles, inside their cells than in the outside environment. The problem here is that water tends to move towards higher concentrations of solutes. So if the concentration of solutes inside the protist is higher than the outside environment, water will tend to diffuse into the cell through osmosis. But the protist wants to maintain that higher level of solute concentration, and it doesn't want to take on so much water that it bursts. So protists need a way to expel water as it enters the cell through osmosis to maintain homeostasis and regulate their water and solute concentrations. They do this using an organelle called the contractile vacuole. The contractile vacuole fills with water as it enters the cell, and then contracts, pushing water out. After this video, there will be a link to a YouTube video of the contractile vacuoles in action if you want to see what that looks like. It's pretty cool.